Wyoming Territory, February 1878 midnight, during the deadliest blizzard of the winter. Don't move. Harper Calloway froze inside the dark cabin as 3 gun hammers clicked around her. Snow clung to her hair. Her lips were blue from the cold, and beneath her coat, a stolen ledger powerful enough to destroy a railroad empire was pressed against her chest. "I answered your advertisement," she said, forcing her trembling voice to remain steady. "You asked for a mail-order bride." The scarred man slowly lowered his revolver, his pale eyes narrowing. That advertisement was a mistake. Harper stared at the 3 armed strangers, then glanced back at the raging storm outside. "Then decide quickly," she whispered, "because the man hunting me will kill all 4 of us." Who were these dangerous men, and why would they risk everything for a runaway bride carrying a deadly secret? Stay with us, subscribe, and discover how one frozen night changed all of their lives forever. The blizzard hit without warning. One moment, the Wyoming sky was just gray and heavy and cold. The next, the world turned white, pure, savage, killing white. The wind screamed down from the peaks like it had a personal grudge against anything still breathing. And Harper Calloway bent her head into it and kept moving. She had been moving for 3 days. Her boots were soaked through. Her fingers had stopped hurting around noon, which she knew, from years of nursing, was a bad sign. Frostbite never announced itself with pain. It announced itself with silence, with numbness, with the slow, quiet theft of everything you thought you owned. She knew all about that brand of theft. The mink coat Sterling had draped over her shoulders on their engagement night was impossibly heavy. Real fur, real money. A gift a man gives, not to warm a woman, but to remind her what she costs. Every time she pulled it tighter against the cold, she felt his presence, his hands, his voice, that patient, flat smile he wore whenever she displeased him. She kept moving anyway. The tree line broke suddenly, and through the howling white, she caught a shape. Dark, square, a cabin half buried in drifts. No lantern in the window, no smoke from the chimney. She squinted against the wind. Could have been abandoned, could have been a trap. But the blizzard was going to kill her within the hour, if she stayed outside. So the math was pretty simple. She crossed the clearing at a run, clutching her carpet bag to her chest. Inside the bag was the ledger. It hadn't left her body in 8 days. She hit the door with her shoulder. The latch gave. She stumbled inside, gasping, snow blowing in around her, like it was chasing her personally. She got the door shut, stood in the dark, and breathed. The place smelled like pine smoke, gun oil, and sweat. Recent sweat, she noted that the same way she used to note which hospital patients were about to take a turn. A quiet, automatic sharpening of attention. "Don't move." The voice came from the dark, low, flat. It left absolutely no room for argument. Harper didn't move. 3 sounds followed. Click, click, click. Hammers pulled back, spread across the room like points on a compass. One ahead of her, one to her left, one somewhere high and to the right. Whoever they were, they knew exactly what they were doing. They had the room covered without crossing each other's lines. A coal-black ember in the fireplace stirred, caught a breath of air, and flared orange for just a second. 3 men. The one directly ahead was tall, broad-shouldered, with a jaw carved from something hard and then broken once and healed wrong. A scar ran from below his left eye to the corner of his mouth. His eyes were pale, the color of creek water in January. He held his revolver like it was part of his arm. The one to her left was bigger, enormous. Truly, he had the build of a man who threw horses around for a living and didn't think it was anything special. His dark hair hung loose and wild, and his face was all suspicion. He looked at her like something he was deciding whether to step on. The one she could only half see, perched on the ladder to the loft, was lean and completely still in a way that made her nervous. His eyes caught the ember light and held it, dark and unreadable. A rifle rested across his knee like it weighed nothing. 3 guns, 3 strangers. One woman standing in their doorway at midnight in a blizzard. Harper reached into her coat pocket slowly. The big man on the left made a warning sound low in his throat. She kept going anyway. Her fingers found the folded paper, and she pulled it out and held it up. I answered an advertisement. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. Nobody spoke. A mail-order bride advertisement, posted in the Cheyenne Gazette. 6 weeks ago, she shook the paper once. It listed this address. Silence. Then the big one muttered something that sounded very much like a curse word, followed by his own name. Boone directed entirely at himself, in the tone of a man furious at his past decisions. The tall, scarred one lowered his gun an inch, just 1 inch. That advertisement, he said slowly, was a mistake. Clearly. Harper lowered the paper. She looked at all three of them in turn, taking her time. But I am here, and that storm outside is not a mistake. That storm is very much happening on purpose. Silence again. The ember was dying. The cabin was cold. She could feel the wet in her boots and that deep, grinding chill that had worked down into her bones and wasn't leaving on its own. She made a decision. It was the same sort of decision she used to make at the hospital when the supervising doctor was useless and the supplies were almost gone and people were dying regardless. You take stock of what you have. You take stock of what you need. Then you act. She reached up and unclasped the mink coat at her throat. The scarred man frowned. What are you? She pulled it off her shoulders. All that weight. All that expensive. Suffocating. Sterling-scented weight. The fur was damp from snow, and it had never once made her warm. Not really. Because warmth was never what it was for. It was a leash made of money. A collar with a very high price tag. She turned toward the fireplace and threw it in. The coals caught immediately. The fur went up fast, filling the cabin with heat and a bitter, acrid smell. And the flames jumped and cracked, and suddenly the room was orange and alive, and all three men were staring at her like she had lost her mind entirely. Maybe she had, but she felt the heat on her face, real heat, and she thought, good riddance. She wanted nothing that had ever belonged to Sterling Voss touching her body again. A woman owns herself, or she owns nothing. And Harper had decided somewhere back in the blizzard that she was done being owned. The big one. Boone was staring at the fire with his mouth slightly open. That was real mink, he said. I know, Harper said. She turned back to face them. The fire was going properly now, and it lit up all their faces. The scarred one watched her with something she couldn't name. The lean one on the ladder hadn't moved, but the set of his shoulders had shifted slightly, like a man recalculating something. The room tilted. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Hadn't slept in longer than that. The adrenaline that had been holding her upright through 3 days of running chose that exact moment, in that exact warm room, to simply stop working. Her knees buckled. She didn't hit the floor. A pair of hands, large and very fast, grabbed her arms from behind. She didn't know which one of them it was. Couldn't turn her head to look. I'm not a threat, she said to the room in general. Her voice was slurring a little now, which she hated. I am a nurse. I have information that will get every one of us killed if we're not careful. And I need to sleep for about 12 hours before I can explain any of it. A pause stretched out. Then the scarred one spoke, Wyatt. She would learn his name later. Right now, he was just a voice in the warm dark, calm and tired sounding, like a man who had witnessed too many impossible things to be surprised by one more. Get her off the floor. Boone, already on it, the big man said, from just behind her. The last thing Harper Calloway saw before she went under was the fire burning high and hot in the grate, eating the last of Sterling's coat down to nothing, and 3 silhouettes standing in the warm light, watching her with the quiet, careful eyes of people who had been hurt before and had not forgotten it. She understood that, down to her bones. She was the same. She let go. Harper woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of men arguing in low voices. She didn't open her eyes right away. Old habit. When you grew up in a house where you never knew what mood you'd be walking into, you learned to listen first. Assess the temperature of a room before you stepped into it. She'd been doing it so long, she didn't even notice anymore. She could be a scout. That was the big one. Boone, his voice had a rough, impatient edge, like a boot scraping gravel. She passed out before she finished a sentence. A different voice. Quieter. More precise. She didn't have a name for that one yet. Scouts fake things. Boone, the third voice. Wyatt's landed flat and final. She's got frostbite on 2 fingers, and she weighs about as much as a wet saddle blanket. She isn't a scout. Silence. She could still be trouble, Boone said. Everyone in this cabin is trouble, Wyatt answered. That's not new information. Harper opened her eyes. She was on a cot near the fire, wrapped in a rough wool blanket that smelled like wood smoke and horses. Someone had pulled her wet boots off and set them near the hearth to dry. Someone had put a second blanket over the first. She sat up slowly. Every muscle in her back staged a formal protest. The 3 men were at the table. Wyatt sat with his arms crossed, watching her with those pale, measuring eyes. Boone had a coffee cup cradled in both hands and was scowling at the table. Callum, the lean one, sat with his chair tipped back against the wall. He was watching her too, but differently, quieter. Like he was reading something in a language he wasn't sure he'd translated right. Morning, Harper said. Afternoon, Wyatt corrected. She'd slept almost 14 hours. She absorbed that fact and then let it go. She'd needed it. Her body had simply collected the debt and cashed it without asking permission. She pushed the blankets back and stood up carefully. The floor was cold even through her stockings. She looked around the cabin properly for the first time. 1 main room, a rough kitchen along the back wall, a table, 4 chairs, the cot she'd been on, and a ladder going up to a loft. 3 bedrolls up there from the look of it. 1 small window on each side, both shuttered. A rifle leaning against the wall next to the door. A shotgun hanging above the fireplace. And various smaller things tucked into belts and boots across all 3 men. They were armed the way most people weren't even in a territory famous for being armed. There's coffee, Wyatt said. He nodded toward the stove. Biscuits from yesterday. They're hard. I've eaten worse, Harper said, and meant it. She crossed to the stove and poured herself a cup, took a biscuit from the cloth on the counter, bit into it, and did not react to the texture, which was, in fact, quite bad. She ate standing up. She could feel all 3 of them watching her, and she let them watch. She'd been scrutinized by worse people for worse reasons. When she'd finished, she turned around and faced them. My name is Harper Calloway, she said. I was a nurse at St. Catherine's Hospital in Denver for 4 years before I was engaged to a man named Sterling Voss. I left him 8 days ago. He is not the sort of man who accepts being left. And because of that, I'm very likely going to bring a significant amount of danger to your door. She paused. You have a right to know that before we go any further. The fire popped. Wind pressed against the shuttered windows. The blizzard hadn't let up yet. Boone looked at Wyatt. Wyatt looked at Boone. Some communication passed between them that Harper couldn't read, but recognized. Men who'd been through things together built their own language eventually. Callum said nothing. He was looking at her carpet bag, which was sitting on the floor beside the cot. Sterling Voss, Wyatt repeated, the railroad man. You've heard of him. I've heard of his money, Wyatt said, which is the same thing. Harper set her coffee cup down on the counter. There's more, but I'll tell you the rest when I know whether or not you're going to put me back out in that blizzard. Boone's jaw tightened. We don't throw women out in blizzards. I don't know that yet, Harper said simply. I don't know you yet. That landed and sat there. Boone looked slightly offended. Callum's expression didn't change, but he brought his chair back down flat against the floor, which for him seemed to constitute a reaction. Wyatt uncrossed his arms and put them on the table. Nobody's going anywhere until that storm clears. After that, we'll figure out the rest. Fair enough, Harper said. She picked up her coffee again, took another sip. Outside, the blizzard howled and kept howling, and the 4 of them occupied the same small, warm space, with all the ease of strangers sharing a lifeboat, which, Harper supposed, was more or less exactly what they were. The storm lasted 2 more days. In that time, Harper learned things. She learned that Wyatt cooked in the mornings, quiet and methodical, and that he made surprisingly decent cornmeal mush, given what he had to work with. She learned that Boone was restless in small spaces, that he needed to be doing something with his hands constantly, or the energy had nowhere to go. He split firewood, even when there was enough firewood. He cleaned the same rifle 3 times in one afternoon. She learned that Callum spoke rarely but listened constantly. He absorbed everything in a room. She'd catch his eyes on her hands sometimes when she was doing something, mending her coat or sorting through her carpet bag, and his expression was always focused and intent, like he was filing things away somewhere, very deep. She learned that none of them slept well. On the second night, she woke at 2 in the morning to the sound of boots on the floorboards. She lay still and watched Wyatt move to the window. Open the shutter a crack, look out at the white dark, and close it again. He did this quietly, mechanically, like a man checking a wound he already knew was there. On the third morning, she came down the loft ladder, which she'd been given the use of while the men slept below near the fire, and found Boone sitting bolt upright on his bedroll, breathing hard, his fists clenched against his knees. He saw her looking, and his face went flat and closed. She looked away immediately, not because she was embarrassed for herself, because she could see he was embarrassed, and he didn't deserve to be made worse. She learned that Callum kept his back to the wall without fail, every room, every meal, every conversation. He positioned himself with something solid behind him and clear sight lines in front. She'd worked in hospitals long enough to recognize a person who'd learned, the very hard way, that threats came from behind. She didn't ask about any of it. She filed it all away. On the morning of the third day, the blizzard stopped. The silence it left behind was enormous, the way silence always is after that much noise. Harper went to the window and looked out at a world that was white and still and brutally cold and very, very beautiful. Wyatt came to stand beside her. "You said you'd tell us the rest," he said, "when you knew we weren't going to throw you out." "I know that now," she said. She went and got the carpet bag. She sat down at the table, and the 3 men sat across from her. She pulled out the ledger and set it in the center of the table. And she told them everything. Sterling's trafficking operation, the routes, the buyers, the names of the hired men, and the paid officials. All of it documented in Sterling's own meticulous handwriting in this book, which she had discovered in his private study on a night when he'd gotten careless and left the safe unlocked. She told them that he'd noticed it was missing 3 days after she'd run, that the first hired man had found her in Laramie, and she'd hidden in a coal cellar for 6 hours while he searched the street above, that she'd bought the horse that dropped dead 20 miles south of their cabin for $40 from a farmer who'd felt sorry for her, and that she'd walked the rest of the way in a blizzard with a ledger that contained enough evidence to put a dozen powerful men away and destroy a railroad empire. When she finished, the cabin was quiet for a long time. Then Boone reached out and opened the ledger to a random page and stared at it. "These are real names," he said. "Yes." He closed it carefully. He looked at Harper with an expression she couldn't quite classify. Not the suspicion from before. Something different. Something that sat somewhere between disbelief and something much closer to awe. "And you just walked out of there with it," he said. "I ran," she corrected. "But yes." Wyatt was looking at the ledger. His pale eyes were very still. "I was a sheriff for 11 years, he said. He said it the way a person describes something that happened to someone else. Distant, factual. "I know what it looks like when law enforcement has been bought. Half the names in that book probably have badges." "I know," Harper said. "That's why I can't go to the law." "She can't go anywhere," Callum said. It was the most he'd said at one time since she'd arrived. His voice was quiet and very even. He was looking at the ledger with his hands flat on the table. "If she walks into any official office in the territory with this, Sterling's people will know before she makes it to the door," he continued. "She needs to get it to someone with print. A newspaper," Harper said. Callum looked at her. "A newspaper back east. Far enough that his reach gets thin. I know someone," Harper said, "in New York. A journalist who's been trying to write about Sterling for 2 years. He just hasn't had anything solid enough." She touched the cover of the ledger. "This is solid." Another silence. Then Wyatt looked up from the book and at each of the other men in turn. Harper watched his face. She'd learned to read people fast, out of necessity, and she could see him making a calculation. Not the money kind, a different kind. The kind where you weigh what something will cost against what it would cost to walk away. He looked at Harper. "You stay," he said. "We figure out a route to get that ledger east. But there are going to be rules. All right, you're free to move around this cabin. Go where you want. Do what you want. Nobody here is your keeper." He said it plainly, without ceremony. "And nobody here touches you unless you say so. I want to be very clear about that." "Clear," Boone said immediately. Callum dipped his head once. Wyatt kept looking at Harper. "You've had someone treat you like property," he said. "That's over now. You're a person. Your body and your choices belong to you. That's not a favor. That's just the basic way it ought to be." Harper held his gaze. She wasn't going to cry. She very much was not. But something behind her ribs did something complicated that she chose not to examine too closely in front of people she'd known for 3 days. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Wyatt said. "It shouldn't require thanks." He was right. It shouldn't. She thought about how many years she'd gone without anyone saying something that obvious and true out loud. And that was a thought she very deliberately folded up and set aside for another time. She shook his hand instead. He looked at her hand in his, then at her face, with an expression that was very briefly unguarded. Then he let go. "I'll make coffee," he said. That night Harper sat by the fire, long after the others had gone to sleep. She had her carpet bag in her lap, and the ledger pressed against her ribs and the fire burning warm in front of her. And outside the world was still and white and cold. And somewhere out there, Sterling Voss was looking for her with everything he had. She was afraid. She wasn't going to pretend otherwise. But she was also, for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, not alone. And whatever these 3 scarred, difficult, dangerous men turned out to be, they had looked at her secret and her danger and her truth tonight, and they hadn't told her to leave. That was worth something, a great deal, in fact. She tucked the ledger back in the bag, pulled the bag close, watched the fire for a while longer, then went upstairs to sleep. She slept without dreams for the first time in 8 days. The nearest town was called Ridgeback, and it was exactly the sort of town its name suggested. Hard ground. Hard men and buildings that had been put up fast and repaired rarely, so that everything had that particular frontier lean of structures that were still standing, more out of stubbornness than structural integrity. A general store, a livery stable, a saloon with a hand-painted sign that had faded until the name was unreadable, a post office that also served as a barber shop, and, on Sundays, a church of indeterminate denomination. Wyatt went in for supplies on the 4th day after the blizzard cleared. He came back with flour, salt pork, and the information that 2 strangers had been asking around about a woman traveling alone. He said it without drama, the way he said most things. But the set of his jaw when he said it was not relaxed. Harper was not surprised. The second trip into town, Wyatt took Callum with him. That was the trip that went wrong. She heard them coming back before she saw them. The horse was moving faster than a horse should move when everything was fine. Boone heard it too. He was outside splitting wood, and he was already setting the axe down when the 2 riders came around the tree line. And by the time Harper got to the door, she saw immediately what the problem was. Callum was listing in the saddle, not dramatically, not the way men fell in stories, with their arms flung wide and great theatrical groans. He was just tilted, a few degrees too far to the right. His face was completely blank, which she'd already learned was his version of pain the same way. Other men went pale or loud. "What happened?" Harper said. She was already moving toward the horse. "Ambush off the north road," Wyatt said. He was down from his horse and at Callum's side in a second. 1 man in the tree line. Didn't see him until the shot. "Shoulder," Callum said. His voice was entirely flat. He was also, Harper could see now, very deliberately, not letting go of his rifle with his good arm. Even now, even shot enlisting, he held on to it, like it was the only certainty available. "Give me the rifle." "Callum," she said. He looked at her. "I'll take care of it," she said. "Let it go." He let it go. She handed it to Boone without looking at him. She took Callum's good arm over her shoulders, and Wyatt took the other side, and together they got him down from the horse and inside the cabin and onto the table, which was the best flat surface available. Boone was already shutting and barring the door. "Get me water on the fire," Harper said, "as much as you've got. And I need light. Every lantern in this cabin. Bring them all here, and whiskey." She was already cutting Callum's coat away at the shoulder seam. He made no sound. "Do any of you have anything that can serve as surgical thread? Fine wire. Even my kit," Callum said. "Where is it?" "Saddlebag. Left side." Boone went back outside at a dead run. Wyatt was at the stove. Harper got the coat and shirt cut away and looked at the wound. It told her nothing because she'd trained her face not to tell things during procedures. What she was looking at was bad, but not unsurvivable. The ball was in there deep, in the meat of the shoulder, missing the joint and the important vessels by what had been very close to not enough. Her hands were steady. They were always steady during procedures. Afterward, sometimes, they shook, but not during. Boone came back in with the saddlebag and put it on the table beside her. She found what she needed, a small roll of thread, very fine, and needles wrapped in cloth, clean and dry. She paused for exactly 1 second. In years of nursing, she'd worked with worse supplies than this. "All right," she said. She looked at Callum. "I need to go in for the ball. I'm going to be honest with you. It's going to hurt a great deal." "Go ahead," Callum said. "I'll need you to stay as still as you can." "Go ahead," he said again, without impatience. "Just clear." She poured whiskey over her hands, over the wound. Callum's breath went sharp and hard through his nose. His jaw clamped tight. Otherwise, he didn't move. Wyatt came around to the other side of the table and stood there, not to hold Callum down, she noticed, just to be there, close enough to matter. Callum turned his head and looked at Wyatt once, briefly, then looked at the ceiling. Harper worked. The room was very quiet, except for the fire and the water and the sound of Callum's controlled breathing. She probed carefully for the ball, working by feel and by the angle of entry. Her hands knew what to do. 4 years in a hospital will do that. You stop thinking in words and your hands just know. She found it. Getting it out was the hard part. Callum's whole body went rigid. His free hand, the one resting flat on the table, clenched hard enough that she could hear his knuckles. A sound came out of him, involuntary, barely audible, bitten down to almost nothing. But it came out. "Almost," she said. She kept her voice even. "Almost." Then she had it. She dropped it into the tin cup she'd set up for the purpose, and the sound it made, when it hit the metal, was very small and very final. And she let herself take one full breath before moving on. "Done," she said. "Now I stitch." Callum released the breath he'd been holding. It came out slow and careful, like he was measuring it. "Hell," Boone said quietly, from somewhere behind her. She stitched the wound closed. She worked neatly, quickly, the way she'd been trained. She was aware of all 3 men watching her. Wyatt was watching her hands specifically. He had the focused attention of a man seeing something he hadn't expected to see. Boone had stopped pacing at some point and was just standing there, holding a lantern that wasn't even needed anymore because the other 3 were close enough. She dressed the wound and tied off the bandage and straightened up. Her back ached. Her neck ached. She pressed her knuckles briefly against her lower back and let herself have that for 2 seconds, and then let go of it. "He needs rest," she said. "Real rest, not just sleep. The shoulder can't be loaded for at least 10 days, or the stitches will tear." She looked at Callum. "That means no rifle." Callum's expression made it very clear how he felt about that. 10 days, she said, without moving. He held her gaze for a moment that had a certain quality to it. Not challenge. More like he was deciding how much to trust her expertise against his own instinct to stay armed at all times. She waited him out. 10 days, he said. "Thank you." She cleaned up, washed her hands. The water in the basin ran pink, and then clear. Boone moved the lanterns back without being asked, and Wyatt was already helping Callum up from the table with the careful, practiced efficiency of men who'd done this for each other before. She was quietly rinsing the instruments when Wyatt came back and stood beside her. "Where did you learn to do that?" he said. "Denver General before St. Catherine's. And before that, my mother. She was a midwife." Harper dried her hands. "Women in my family treated things. It was just expected. Most people would have needed a real doctor. There wasn't a real doctor," she said, "so I was the real doctor." Wyatt was quiet for a moment. He was looking at the basin of water, at the instruments laid out clean on the cloth beside it. His jaw was doing something complicated. "That's the thing I got wrong," he said. He said it low, like it cost him something to say it. "When I was a lawman, I thought." He stopped, started again. "I thought protecting women meant keeping them away from the hard parts. Out of the way. Safe in a back room somewhere." "Yes," Harper said. "But safe doesn't mean protected if it means powerless." She looked at him. "No," she said, "it doesn't." He met her eyes. That brief, unguarded thing again. It came and went quickly. "Callum would be dead without you," he said. "He's not, though." "No," Wyatt agreed. "He's not." Boone appeared from the loft ladder, coming back down after apparently getting Callum settled. He stopped at the bottom rung and looked at Harper with an expression that she'd have described, if pressed, as someone reassessing a calculation they'd been quite confident in. "You did that, like you weren't scared at all," he said. "I was scared," Harper said. "I was very scared. But scared and capable aren't mutually exclusive." Boone looked at her for another moment. Then he walked to the stove, picked up the coffee pot, and held it up in her direction. Which, for Boone, she was beginning to understand, was an act of genuine courtesy. "Coffee," he said. "Please," she said. Later, after the cabin had settled into the particular quiet of a hard afternoon giving way to a harder evening, Harper climbed the loft ladder to check on Callum. He was awake, lying flat, staring at the rough timber ceiling, his bandaged shoulder immobile, and the rest of him very, very still. She checked the bandage, pressed 2 fingers against his wrist for his pulse. Steady, a little fast, but steady. "You should sleep," she said. "I know," he said. She moved to go back down. His voice stopped her. "Thank you." She turned back. He was still looking at the ceiling, but his profile was not entirely closed the way it usually was. There was something slightly open in it, a hairline crack in a wall that was otherwise solid all the way through. "You're welcome," she said. She started down the ladder again. "Harper," his voice was quieter this time. She stopped. "The man who sent the bounty hunters. Sterling Voss." A pause. "He's going to send more." "I know," she said. "You're not afraid of that." It wasn't quite a question. "I'm afraid of it," she said. "I just decided it wasn't going to stop me. There's a difference." She went back down the ladder. She didn't hear him respond. But when she glanced up once before reaching the bottom, Callum had turned his head and was looking down at her with that dark, intent reading gaze. She went to help Wyatt with dinner. Outside, the wind came back. Not a blizzard this time, just the usual cold. The kind that was simply the price of living in Wyoming territory in late winter. Brutal and ordinary and survivable if you were smart and careful and not alone. All 4 of them were. Tonight, not alone. That still counted for something. They came on a Tuesday. Harper knew it was a Tuesday because she'd been keeping track in a small notebook she'd found in the back of a kitchen drawer. Nobody had told her to. Nobody needed to. When you're hiding from a man with enough money to hire patience, you keep track of the days. You count them. It's how you stay oriented. It's how you stop the fear from making time feel shapeless and enormous and impossible to measure. Tuesday morning, 12 days since the blizzard. Callum's shoulder was healing well. Well enough that he'd resumed his habit of sitting at the window in the morning with a cup of coffee and watching the tree line. Not with the rifle yet. Harper held firm on that, but he watched the same way. Same stillness, same attention. It was Callum who saw them first. He said one word: ridge. Wyatt was across the room and at the window in 3 steps. Harper looked out over Wyatt's shoulder. The morning light was thin and flat. She could see the ridge north of the cabin, a long, low spine of rock and scrub pine about 400 yards out. And she could see what Callum had seen. Movement, the kind that didn't belong to deer or wind. The flash of something that wasn't natural. Metal, maybe. A buckle, a barrel. How many, Wyatt said. 6, Callum said. Maybe 7. 2 on the east end moving to flank. You can tell all that, Harper said. Yes, Callum said simply, because he could, and he knew he could. And he didn't feel the need to be humble about the things he was genuinely good at. Boone was already loading the shotgun. He moved through it the way he moved through anything physical, automatically, efficiently, with that total comfort in his own body that some large men have when they've learned to use what they were given. Harper. Wyatt turned from the window, and she looked at him. He held out his hand. In it was a revolver, a Colt single-action army, .45 caliber. The barrel was 4 3/4 inches, and the grip was worn smooth with a lot of use. Have you ever fired one of these? No, she said honestly. Can you learn fast? That's generally been my experience with myself, she said. Something moved briefly across his face that was almost a smile. He crossed to her and stood behind her, and she took the gun the way he indicated. Grip in the right hand, muzzle down. He was very close. She could feel the heat of him at her back. His arm came around her right side, and his hand closed over hers, adjusting the angle of the grip, 2 fingers at a time, until the gun sat in her hand exactly the way it was meant to. Thumb here, he said. Not on the hammer. Never on the hammer, until you're ready to shoot. You pull it back, then the trigger, not both at once. His voice was in her ear, low and very focused. Don't hold your breath. Breathe out slow when you fire. And for the love of all that's holy, don't close your eyes. I don't close my eyes when I use a scalpel either, she said. Then don't close them now. He adjusted her arm, elevated her elbow just slightly. She could feel the correction in her shoulder. The way the line from elbow to wrist to barrel suddenly made more sense. Became a single unified thing instead of separate awkward parts. Look down the barrel, he said, sight and target. 1 line. Harper looked down the barrel, lined it up with the window frame across the room. Good, Wyatt said. He stepped back. The space he left behind was cold immediately. The men coming down that ridge, he said, are not coming to talk. Sterling hired professionals, which means they're going to try to flank us on 2 sides at once and come through the door fast. He looked at Boone. Then at Callum. Callum, I need you inside and high. Callum nodded. He looked at the loft. Boone, front porch. Clear the approach. Boone grinned. It was not a cheerful grin. It was the grin of a man who had been sitting still too long and had a great deal of energy that needed somewhere to go. Harper, Wyatt said, you stay at the back wall. Anyone comes through that rear window. They don't get a second chance. Harper looked at the rear window, then at the gun in her hand. She thought about Sterling, about the way he'd told her once, over a very civilized dinner in a very expensive restaurant, that a woman who understood her limitations was a woman who could be happy. He'd said it as if he were giving her a gift. True freedom, Wyatt said, looking at her directly, is having the power to defend your own life. Harper, not having someone else do it for you while you hide in a room. Power over your own safety. That's yours. Take it. It wasn't a speech. He said it the way he said everything. Flat and honest and without decoration. But it landed somewhere deep. She took it. They waited. 12 minutes. She counted them. Then it started. The first shot came from the ridge. Wide, a warning shot or a ranging shot. It didn't matter. Boone was out the front door before the echo finished, and the shotgun went off once, and then again, and she heard him shout something that wasn't a word exactly, but communicated a great deal. 2 men came around the left side of the cabin at a run. Wyatt stepped out from the wall and fired twice, smooth and fast. No wasted motion. 1 man went down. The second pivoted and fired, and the shot went into the wall 6 inches from Wyatt's shoulder, and Wyatt fired again. Silence on the left side. The rear window shattered. Harper spun, and a man was halfway through it. 1 leg in and 1 out. And she had the Colt up, with the sight aligned, and the hammer back, before she'd fully thought about it. He saw the gun, pointed at his face from 12 feet away, and he stopped moving. Get back out, she said. He was a big man. Thick neck, a hired look about him. The look of someone doing a job, rather than having a cause. He looked at the gun. He looked at her face. He went back out the window. She heard him hit the ground outside and run. Good, Wyatt said from across the room. She didn't lower the gun until she heard the running footsteps get 100 yards away. Outside, the shooting had become sporadic. Single shots, spread out. Then Callum's rifle spoke from above. Once, and then again. And then there was a long silence. Boone came back in through the front door, working the lever on the shotgun. Clear, he said. He had a cut above his left ear that was bleeding into his hairline, and he hadn't appeared to notice. Wyatt went out to check the perimeter. He was gone 6 minutes. Harper counted those 2. He came back in and secured the door. 2 down, 4 ran. He looked at Callum's position in the loft. Good shooting. Callum came down the ladder without responding. He was moving his right shoulder experimentally. He'd taken no shots with the rifle, she realized. He'd been watching, guiding from position, keeping his word about the stitches. She noticed that. He noticed her noticing, and looked away. Boone dropped into a chair and set the shotgun across his knees and blew out a long breath. That's the first wave, he said. Yes, Wyatt said. There'll be more. Yes. Boone looked at Harper. You hold that corner. Yes, Harper said. She put the Colt down on the table carefully and deliberately, exactly the way Wyatt had shown her. Muzzle pointed at the wall. Hammer down. Boone looked at the gun. Looked at her. Good, he said. Coming from Boone. She was learning. That was an entire paragraph. Wyatt sat down across from her. He looked tired. Not weak. Just tired in the bone-deep way of a man who had been in too many rooms like this one over too many years. He rubbed one hand over his jaw. Those men had Sterling's mark, he said. His paid crew uses a particular set of gear, same holsters. Custom work from a Denver maker. I know it. He looked at the table. He knows where we are. Then we can't stay, Callum said. We can't run either, Wyatt said. Not with that ledger. We need a plan. Harper picked the Colt up again, not pointing at anything, just holding it, getting used to the weight of it. It was heavy, real and solid and heavy in her hand. She'd spent years thinking that a gun was a man's object. Sterling had told her once that a woman with a gun was dangerous in all the wrong ways. He'd said it like he was being kind, like he was protecting her from herself. What he was protecting himself from was her. A woman who could defend herself didn't need a man to define the terms of her safety for her. Didn't need to trade freedom for protection. Didn't need to accept the cage because the cage had a lock on the inside. She turned the gun over in her hand. The grip was warm now from being held. Teach me to reload it, she said to Wyatt. He looked up. The reload, she said. Show me how to do it fast. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he took a handful of cartridges from his vest pocket and set them on the table between them. All right, he said. Watch. He walked her through it, slowly first, then at speed. The cylinder, the spent brass, the new rounds, the click of everything settling back into place. She did it twice herself, then 3 times, then until she could do it without looking at her hands. Boone watched this for a while. Then he said, not loudly, hell, Wyatt, she's faster than you were at first. I know, Wyatt said, without embarrassment. He was watching her hands with that particular attention of a man who took competence seriously, regardless of where he found it. Callum, from his chair against the wall, said nothing, but his eyes were on her, and they were very still and very warm in a way she hadn't seen from him before. And she filed that away, too. In the same place, she was filing all the other things about these 3 men that she was slowly learning to read. Outside, the afternoon was getting long. The shadows came down off the ridge, early this time of year, and by 4 in the afternoon, the clearing in front of the cabin was already going gray. Harper set the Colt down and looked at the 3 men. Tell me what the plan is, she said. I'm not cargo. I'm not something to be moved from one safe spot to another while the 3 of you decide things. She looked at each of them in turn. I brought the ledger out. I know it better than any of you. If you're making a plan, I'm in the room when you make it. A beat of silence. Then Wyatt said, sit down. She sat. He spread a rough map on the table. Callum leaned forward. Boone pulled his chair in. The 4 of them bent over it together. Heads close, voices low, as the light outside went from gray to dark. And somewhere out there, on Sterling Voss's payroll, More men were being hired and given a direction and a description. But in this cabin, in this circle of lamplight, 4 people with very good reasons to be afraid were choosing not to be. That was the plan, to begin with. After that, they made a better one. The plan took 2 days to build and 20 minutes to fall apart. Wyatt had mapped 3 routes east. One followed the main road as far as Casper before cutting northeast toward the rail connections. Too exposed, too obvious, too many places for a man with money to post watchers. The second went through mountain passes that were still buried in February snow and would stay that way for another 6 weeks at minimum. The third cut south through the timber, through 2 days of rough country, to a relay station where a sympathetic former deputy of Wyatt's could move the ledger by courier to a journalist contact Harper knew in St. Louis. From St. Louis, it could travel safely to New York. That was the plan. The plan required moving through the timber. They'll be watching the timber, Callum said, on the morning they left. Yes, Wyatt said. So we move fast and we move quiet. Yes, Callum looked at Harper. She had the carpet bag strapped tight across her body, the ledger inside it, pressed flat against her ribs. She'd moved it there 2 days ago, had wrapped it in oilcloth and tucked it in her bodice beneath her coat. Closer than the bag, closer than anything. If she went down, the ledger was still on her person. That was the logic. She didn't tell the men about it. She just did it and moved on. The timber was cold and close, and full of the kind of silence that wasn't actually silent. Wind in the upper branches, the occasional hard crack of frozen wood. Somewhere to the west, birds going up fast, which meant something had disturbed them, which meant Callum immediately put a fist up, and all 4 of them stopped. They stood still for a full 3 minutes. Harper barely breathed. Then Callum dropped his fist, and they moved again. They made good time for the first 4 miles. The snow was heavy under the trees, but packed hard enough to move through without breaking through at every step. Harper's legs were burning. She'd grown up on horseback and on hard work, and she was not delicate. But 4 miles through deep snow at pace was a different variety of punishment than any she was accustomed to. She didn't say anything. She kept up. They were crossing a narrow creek bed, frozen solid, the far bank rising steeply into a stand of dark spruce. When the shot came, it came from the left and high. Wyatt spun and returned fire before she'd fully processed the sound. Boone went left and low, toward the tree line, enormous and fast and completely committed, the shotgun up. Callum was already moving for the high ground on the right, covering Boone's flank. Harper ran for the far bank. She made it 3/4 of the way up before her boot broke through a patch of thin ice over running water beneath, and her leg went down to the knee. She wrenched herself free. The momentum of it drove her sideways into the bank, and her left arm caught a protruding root and tore. She felt it tear. She registered the sharp, bright pain of it, and then she registered something else. Something that had shifted in how she was carrying herself. Something that felt suddenly lighter against her ribs. She looked down. The impact had split the front seam of her coat. The oilcloth wrapping had come partially loose and pressed against the lining. Caught in the torn fabric at the opening was the ledger. Still there, still hers. She shoved it back inside her coat with her good arm and pressed her hand flat over it and kept climbing. The shooting below lasted 90 seconds. It felt like an hour. Then it stopped. She crested the bank and pressed her back against a spruce trunk and pulled the ledger out and checked it. The oilcloth had held. Every page inside was dry and intact. She pressed it back against her chest. Boone appeared first over the bank, moving fast. His big frame coming up over the edge, like the slope, was nothing to him. He saw her immediately. He covered the distance between them in about 4 strides. "You're bleeding," he said. Her left sleeve was dark from the elbow down. She looked at it. "The root," she said. "When I went into the bank, it's not arterial. It's not deep. You need to—" "I know what I need," she said. "Help me get the sleeve up." He did it carefully, which surprised her slightly. Those big hands were very precise when they wanted to be. He pushed her sleeve to the elbow, and they both looked at the gash. Ugly, not dangerous. She'd need to clean and close it when they stopped. Wyatt and Callum came over the bank together. Wyatt looked at her arm, then at her face. "You all right?" "Yes." He looked at the arm again. He wasn't satisfied with her answer, but he'd also clearly learned by now that pushing her on things like this was a waste of both their time. "How many?" Callum said. To Wyatt, 3. 2 ran. Wyatt looked back down the slope. "The third won't be running anywhere. They're getting closer together," Callum said. "The timing. First wave, then a week, now 4 days. Tightening," Wyatt said. "Sterling's getting impatient." Boone had his hand lightly against Harper's uninjured arm, not gripping it. Just there, like a large and quietly furious bookmark. He was looking down the bank with an expression that said several things simultaneously, most of them violent. "Harper," Wyatt said. She looked at him. "What happened to the ledger?" She held his gaze. Then she unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of her coat and pulled the ledger out. All 3 men looked at it. "It was in there the whole time," Wyatt said. "Yes, against your body." "Yes." She buttoned her coat back up, one-handed, the injured arm not cooperating well. "I moved it out of the bag 2 days ago. If the bag went, the ledger would go with it. Down, I'd still have it. The bag can be cut from someone's hand. This can't." A silence. Boone made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Callum was looking at her with that dark, precise attention. He hadn't said anything. He didn't say anything now either. But the expression on his face was not one she'd seen from him before. It was direct and unguarded, and she couldn't look at it for too long without her throat doing something inconvenient. Wyatt sat down on a fallen log. He pressed one hand over his face briefly, like a man recalibrating. "You've been carrying that against your body for 2 days, he said. "Yes." "In a blizzard territory with bounty hunters actively hunting you." "Also yes, because you decided," he said slowly, "that the safest place for the evidence of a major criminal operation was physically on your person. In the event of my injury or incapacitation, the ledger would still be recoverable," Harper said, "and the men looking for it would have to go through me directly rather than through a bag, which they'd hesitate to do in front of witnesses because Sterling needs me alive. He needs me to not talk." She looked at Wyatt steadily. "The ledger being on my body was a strategic advantage. I used it." Wyatt put his hand down. He looked at her for a long moment. "That's not someone being kept safe," he said. He wasn't saying it to her. He was saying it for himself, working something out. "That's someone running an operation." "Yes," Harper said. Boone let out a slow breath. He stepped back and pushed his hat up and looked at the treetops. "Wyatt," he said, "I know she stole the ledger. She got it out of the territory. She hid it on herself so we couldn't lose it. She's the one running this." "I know, Boone." Harper looked at the ledger in her hand. 8 days she'd carried it before the cabin. 12 more since. 20 days of this weight, this responsibility, this constant calculation of where it needed to be and whether she was keeping it there. She'd done it alone for the first 8, completely, utterly, without help. Not because she was reckless, because she understood that this ledger was the only weapon she had, and she was not going to put it down. "He hurts people," she said. She said it simply, because it was simple. "The women in these pages aren't abstractions. I saw 2 of them in Denver. I know what they looked like after. I know what was done to them." She pressed the ledger flat between her palms. "I am going to burn him down. Every root, every name, every bought official. I'm going to put it all in front of people with printing presses, and I'm going to watch his empire turn to ash on newsprint." She looked up. "That's not bravery. That's just arithmetic. He hurt people, and he will keep hurting people until someone makes it cost him everything he has." Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Callum said, very quietly, "The relay station is 11 miles from here." He stood up. He offered Harper his good arm, not to lead her, not to carry her, to walk beside her. His arm available, if she needed it, on terms that were entirely hers to accept or refuse. She took it. They walked. She dressed her arm that evening at the relay station by firelight, while all 3 men watched with the careful attention of people who'd stopped underestimating her and were now simply paying attention. The gash needed 4 stitches. She did them herself, one-handed, with her teeth holding the thread to keep it taut. Boone watched her do that and made the sound again that wasn't quite a word. The ledger went east the following morning with Wyatt's contact, wrapped in oilcloth, hidden in a flower shipment, with a letter from Harper tucked inside the front cover, addressed to a journalist named Daniel Marsh at the St. Louis Dispatch, which read, Daniel, every name, every route, every dollar, all of it. Do not wait for confirmation from me. Print it, H. She watched it go. Then she turned around and walked back to the relay station, where Wyatt had coffee on the stove, and Boone was outside doing something energetic to the woodpile, and Callum was at the window, watching the road, with his back to the wall. She sat down. She put her hands flat on the table, and she let herself have 30 seconds of feeling the full weight of what she'd just done. Sent the thing she'd carried for 20 days away from her body. The thing that had been the point of all of it. Gone now, moving east. 30 seconds. Then she looked up. What's next? She said. Wyatt poured her coffee. We wait to see if Sterling knows it's gone, he said, and when he figures it out, he'll come himself, Callum said from the window, without turning around. Yes, Wyatt said. Harper wrapped her hands around the cup. Good, she said. They went back to the cabin. It wasn't the obvious move, which was exactly why Wyatt chose it. Sterling's men had already hit it, already cataloged it, already reported its location. Going back suggested a confidence, or a stupidity, that a careful man like Sterling would find worth analyzing before acting on. And while he was analyzing, they had time. Time was what they needed. They needed the ledger to reach St. Louis. They needed Daniel Marsh to read it and make the calculations and start protecting himself legally before he printed a word. They needed the wheels to begin turning in places far enough east that Sterling's reach got thin. Callum had said that. Sterling's reach gets thin. She thought about that a lot in the days that followed. They fell into routines. The four of them. Routines were what you built when you couldn't control the larger picture. You controlled the small things. The morning coffee, the watch rotation, the twice-daily check of the perimeter. Boone fixed the sidewall where one of the shooters had put a round through the lumber. He did it with the thoroughness of someone who needed the work. He replaced 3 boards, squared them properly, chinked the gaps. Then he fixed the hinge on the front door because it had been squeaking for 2 weeks and he'd apparently run out of other things to repair. Wyatt did the cooking and kept the watch schedule and spent his evenings oiling the guns, all of them, methodically, by lantern light at the table. He didn't talk much during those evenings. He didn't need to. There was something restful about him at those moments, for all that the man was barely restful in any other context. Callum healed, slowly and without complaint. He let Harper check his shoulder every other day. He sat still and looked at the wall while she unwrapped and redressed it, and said things like this is healing well, or try to move it gently this way. And he followed her instructions precisely. Which she was learning was his version of trust. She gave him a book from the small stack she'd found in the bottom of the kitchen cabinet. 3 novels and an agricultural almanac. He took the novel without comment and read it in 2 days. She gave him the second one. He took that one too. One evening she came down from the loft at about 2 in the morning because she'd heard something. It was Boone. He was sitting on the floor in front of the dead fire, his back against the stone of the hearth, his knees drawn up and his forearms resting on them. His head was back and his eyes were open, and he was staring at the ceiling with an expression she'd never seen on his face in daylight. He looked scraped clean, all the restless energy, all the forward motion and rough humor, completely gone. Just a man sitting in the dark with something very old and very heavy pressing down on him. She'd seen it before. Not this man, but this weight. Men who came back from things. Men who carried what had happened inside them the way a wound carries infection. Out of sight, working quietly. She didn't speak to him. She went to the kitchen and put the smallest amount of wood on the coals and got them going again, very quietly, and put water on and made coffee. She brought him a cup and set it on the floor beside his hand, and she sat down on the other end of the hearth with her own cup, and she looked at the fire. He didn't acknowledge her for a long time. Then he picked up the cup. "I woke you," he said. "No," she said. He looked at her sideways. He knew she was lying, and she knew he knew. They left it where it was. "I had a sister," he said after a while. She waited. "Younger than me by 3 years. Her name was Cora." He was looking at the fire. "A man? A man who was supposed to be?" He stopped. "It doesn't matter who he was supposed to be. What he did, he did. And I got there too late, because I didn't know to get there at all." He turned the cup in his hands. "That was 9 years ago." "Cora," Harper said. He looked at her again. "Is she alive?" Harper asked. "Yes. Where is she?" "Denver." He looked back at the fire. "She married eventually. Has a son. She's all right. She worked very hard at becoming all right, which is its own kind of thing to watch someone do." "Yes," Harper said, "it is." He was quiet. "Women who don't have anyone to stand between them, and the wrong people. Women in situations like yours. That's when He stopped again. "That's why you reacted the way you did when I arrived," she said, not accusing him, just saying it. "I saw someone scared and trying not to show it," he said. "I know what that looks like." He finally looked at her directly. "I'm sorry I pointed a gun at you. You didn't know me yet," Harper said. "Still, you put it down," she said. "When you decided I wasn't a threat, you put it down. A man who didn't care wouldn't have thought about it." Boone looked at the fire for a long time. "I should have looked for the men responsible," he said. "The ones like Sterling, the ones running the operations. Instead, He made a gesture with his cup, threw wood at the problem. "Stewed over Cora, which she didn't need, which she told me repeatedly she didn't need." "She was right," Harper said. "And you were doing the only thing you knew how to do with the guilt." He looked at her. "Standing over someone doesn't fix anything," she continued. "It makes the person you love into a problem you're trying to manage. It's well meant. I know it's well meant. But it takes someone's recovery and makes it about your feelings." She looked at the fire. "The only cure for guilt like that is to change what's possible for the next person in that position, for the system itself." Boone was very still. "That's what you're doing," he said slowly, "with the ledger." "Partly," she said, "but not only. What I'm doing with the ledger is the minimum. What comes after it is the harder work." He absorbed that. They sat with the fire for another hour. She didn't push, and he didn't explain further, and neither of them filled the silence with words it didn't need. When the fire had burned low again, and the cabin was warm enough, Boone uncurled from the floor and went back to his bedroll, and this time, she noticed. He lay down and closed his eyes, and his breathing slowed. She sat a while longer. On a morning in the second week back, Harper came around the side of the cabin with a bucket of water from the spring and stopped. Wyatt was chopping wood. He'd taken his shirt off, which in February, in Wyoming territory, said something specific about the heat generated by sustained physical labor. He had his back to her, and she saw his back, and she stood very still for a moment. The scars were old, fully healed, smooth, pale, and numerous. They ran diagonally across his back from right shoulder to left hip, crossing each other in places, layering, which meant they hadn't all come from one event. They covered perhaps half his back, the kind of scarring that came from a whip, repeatedly. Over time, she had treated whip wounds in the hospital. She knew exactly what produced marks like those. She set the bucket down quietly and turned to go back around the front. "You can stay," Wyatt said. He hadn't looked around. He brought the axe down and split a log clean and set another on the block. She stayed. She picked the bucket up again and walked to the barrel near the back wall and poured the water in. Slowly, without rushing it, she could hear the axe falling behind her in a steady rhythm. "I was a sheriff in a town called Greville," Wyatt said. He wasn't raising his voice. He was just talking toward the tree line, the words carrying back to her without effort. "Small town, not much to it. But there was a man there named Aldous Cray, who owned the Main Street outright, the bank, the hotel, the supply store. He also ran a debt system that meant most of the population owed him money they'd never be able to pay back." She turned the empty bucket in her hands. "Cray had men who enforced the debt," Wyatt said, "when a man couldn't pay. Cray's people came to his house. He split another log, came to his family, That's when you stepped in, Harper said. That's when I tried. He brought the axe down hard. Cray's men included 2 of my deputies. The circuit judge was Cray's brother-in-law. The marshal who outranked me had an account at Cray's bank that was very much in surplus. He stacked the split wood. I made a formal complaint through proper channels. He picked up the next log. Cray's response was to have 4 of his men come to my house on a Tuesday night and make their position clear. They held you down, Harper said. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The answer was on his back. After that, he said, I understood something that I should have understood a great deal sooner. The law is a structure like any other structure. It only works if the people inside it are honest. If they're not, the structure becomes a cage for the people it's supposed to protect. It looks like law from the outside, but it isn't. It's just power dressed up in a badge. He drove the axe into the chopping block and left it there. He picked up his shirt from the fence post where he draped it and pulled it on without any particular hurry or self-consciousness. He turned around. Harper looked at him. That's why you walked away from the badge, she said. I didn't walk, he said. I threw it through Cray's window and then I left, which I'm aware was more dramatic than it needed to be. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, you should know that what they did to you has a name. It's called torture. What they did was torture. It doesn't matter that it happened in your own town. It doesn't matter who gave the order. It matters that you know what it was. Wyatt held her gaze. I know what it was, he said. And it wasn't your fault for pursuing justice, she said. That's the thing they wanted you to believe, that you caused it by being inconvenient. You didn't. He looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then he picked up the water bucket and went to refill it from the spring, and she went inside. And that was all. But that evening at dinner, he passed her the bread first, before anyone else. With the kind of quiet deliberateness that wasn't about bread at all, the days passed. She watched Callum. She'd been watching him since the first night. He was the hardest of the 3 to read, built from a kind of privacy, so total it had become structural. He spoke in sentences short enough to be nearly statements of fact. He positioned himself with a wall at his back in every room, every meal, every conversation, without fail, without exception, without appearing to think about it. It was reflexive, automatic, the behavior of a man whose nervous system had learned a long time ago that what comes from behind you can kill you. One afternoon, she sat down on the opposite side of the table from where he was reading. He looked up. Can I ask you something? She said. He waited. The wall, she said. He looked at her steadily. How old were you when you learned to need it? She said. He was quiet for so long she thought he'd decided not to answer. Then he set the book down. My mother was Arapaho, he said. My father was a white trapper who came through her village once and was very charming, apparently, for about 3 months. He said it without bitterness and without irony and without the particular performative carefulness people sometimes used when talking about these things. He just said it like it was true, because it was. Her people tolerated me because she was respected. His people tolerated me when it was convenient. He folded the corner of his page. There were stretches when I was a child when I genuinely did not know who was safe. Not the way other children don't know. I mean, I truly did not have a category in my mind for predictably safe. Every space was provisional. So you learn to watch, Harper said. I learned to watch, he said, and to always be in a position where you can see what's coming. That's not paranoia, Harper said. That's intelligence applied to a real and consistent threat. You adapted. You survived. She looked at him. The problem is that survival tools don't always retire when the immediate danger is gone. The wall, the watching. Your nervous system still thinks you need them. He looked at her with those dark, still eyes. I do still need them, he said. Sometimes, she said. Yes, but not always. Not in here. A silence. He looked at the table. Then he looked back up at her with something very direct in his face. I know, he said quietly. I'm working on knowing that. She nodded. She picked up her mending, and he picked up his book, and they sat on opposite ends of the table in the warm, quiet cabin, while Wyatt moved around in the kitchen, and Boone's axe rang outside in the cold air. And Callum read his page with his back to the wall. But once, just once, she caught him, with his chair shifted a few inches from the wall. Not all the way out, just a few inches, testing the distance, seeing what it felt like. She didn't mention it. She went back to her mending. The nights were long, and the cold was real, and the men desired her with a thoroughness that was visible to everyone in the cabin, including probably the horses outside. She was not blind to it. She saw the way Boone's eyes tracked her when she moved across the room. She saw Wyatt's jaw tighten when she leaned close to read the map over his shoulder. She felt Callum's attention on her, like a hand pressed flat against her shoulder blade. None of them moved. None of them pushed. None of them said a word about it. Wyatt's rule sat in the cabin like a fourth wall. Nobody touches her without her permission. He'd said it on the second morning, and it hadn't needed to be said again because all three of them had taken it into themselves and stayed there. She lay awake some nights and thought about that. Men who wanted something and simply decided not to take it. Not because they couldn't, because she hadn't chosen it yet, because her autonomy was not a courtesy they were extending. It was a principle they were living. She'd never had that before. Not once. In all her years of navigating men who assumed their desire was an argument. She lay awake and thought about it, and looked at the dark ceiling, and listened to the winter wind push at the walls, and thought about the day when she would choose, when she was ready, when it was hers to give, because it had always been hers. She thought it might be coming soon. The warning came from Callum at 4 in the morning. He didn't shout. He never shouted. He simply came down from his watch position on the loft, walked to the first bedroll, put his hand on Wyatt's shoulder, and said one word, now. Wyatt was on his feet before his eyes were fully open. Harper was already awake. She'd been awake for the past hour, lying still, listening to something she couldn't name, a quality in the silence outside, something slightly too deliberate. She came down the ladder as Wyatt and Callum moved to the windows on opposite sides of the cabin. Boone rolled upright from his bedroll and reached for the shotgun in the same motion and said nothing at all. How many? Wyatt said. Callum had the shutter open a half-inch. He was looking through it with the focused stillness of a man reading a page. 12, maybe 15, he said, coming from 3 sides. They left the south open. Of course they did, Wyatt said, because they want us to run south. Harper said. Wyatt looked at her. Callum looked at her. They're behind us if we run south, she said. They catch us in the open. Yes, Wyatt said. He was pulling his gun belt on. Which means we don't run south. We don't run at all, Callum said. Boone levered around into the shotgun. The sound was very final in the quiet cabin. They had approximately 4 minutes before whoever was out there decided to stop waiting and start moving. Harper could feel it. She'd been in rooms with incoming crisis enough times to know the particular compression of time that preceded it, the way a breath shortens slightly, the way sound becomes very clear. She went to her medical bag. She'd reorganized it a week ago, partly out of habit and partly out of a calculation she'd been running quietly ever since the second ambush. She knew what was in it, and she knew what those things could do in configurations other than their intended use. She'd been a nurse for 4 years in a frontier hospital where you made do with what you had. And making do was something she was genuinely good at. She pulled out 2 brown bottles, a tin, a length of cloth. Boone looked at what was in her hands. What is that? He said. Carbolic acid and silver nitrate, she said, and lamp oil. She was already moving toward the back corner of the cabin, to the side door they never used because the hinge was stiff. If someone comes through here and I'm not in position to fire accurately, I need another option. You're making an explosive, Boone said. I'm making a barrier, she said. There's a difference. One kills people. One buys time. Can you do it without blowing yourself up? Wyatt said. She looked at him over her shoulder. I've administered anesthesia by lantern light in a hospital with a leaking roof, she said. I think I can manage a controlled chemical reaction. Wyatt's jaw did the thing. He nodded once. Callum, roof, he said. They'll have to go through you to get angles on the ridge approach. I'll take the west windows. Boone the porch. Boone was already at the door. He paused with his hand on the latch. He turned and looked back at Harper, just briefly. A single full-second look that said a great deal, and none of it was simple. Then he went out. Callum went up the ladder with his rifle, and through the roof hatch. She heard him move across the snow above her head. Very quiet for a man going onto a pitched roof in the dark. Wyatt came and stood near her for a second. "Harper," he said. She looked up from what she was doing. He didn't say anything else for a moment. Then, "Stay alive. That's the plan," she said. He went to the west wall. Then they came. The first shot hit the cabin from the north, above the window line. Someone establishing distance. Then a second, closer. Then Callum's rifle spoke from the roof. Once, and the northern shooting stopped. He'd found the angle in the dark in about 30 seconds. A crash at the front. Boone's shotgun. Then again. And someone shouting. And Boone's voice underneath it, roaring something incoherent and absolute. Two men came around the east side at a run, and Wyatt fired through the window. 3 shots fast and deliberate. And one man went down, and the other ducked back. Something hit the side door hard. Harper braced. The latch held. The hinge did not. The door burst open, and she was ready. She threw the prepared cloth forward, into the gap of the doorway, and touched the lantern flame to it, and turned her face away. The reaction was fast and hot and loud, not an explosion in the way stories made them. More like a wall of fire and pressure, and a chemical smell, so sharp it burned the inside of her nose. It hit the open doorway sideways, and anyone standing in that doorframe caught it full in the face. She heard a scream outside, then footsteps going away very fast. She kicked the door shut and dragged the heavy table against it one-handed, and went back to the wall where she'd positioned the Colt. Her hands were shaking. She looked at them for exactly 1 second. Then she aimed at the window and breathed and waited. Callum's rifle above her was working in a rhythm now. Measured, unhurried, absolutely precise. 3 shots, then silence. Then 2 more, then silence. He was running the roof like it was a survey, methodical, covering every approach point in sequence. The shooting on the west side got heavy. She heard Wyatt taking fire from multiple positions. She heard the window shutter blow apart. She heard Wyatt curse, which was the first time she'd ever heard him do it. And she held herself in place because she couldn't help him if she left the rear. Then she heard him fire again. So he was still standing. She stayed at the wall. The rear window opened from outside. A man's hand came through, and she fired once, and the hand disappeared. She reloaded, smooth and without looking at her hands, exactly as she'd practiced. 3 more minutes of sporadic fire. Then Boone's shotgun went off twice more, very close together. And she heard his boots on the porch boards, and then his voice, enormous and carrying over the whole clearing. "Anyone still standing out there better make a decision," he said. "I've got plenty more, and the night is long." Silence, then footsteps, multiple pairs, moving away, going north, going fast. More silence. Callum's voice came from above, through the roof hatch. "Clear," he said. Harper put her back against the wall and breathed. Her arm, the injured one, from the creek bed, had reopened at some point. She could feel the wet of it. She pressed her hand over it and kept breathing. Wyatt came through the west side and stopped when he saw her against the rear wall. "I'm fine," she said immediately. "You're bleeding," he said. "I'm aware. I'll handle it in a minute." He came across the cabin to her anyway, not taking her word for it, and took her arm with both hands and looked at it. She let him. He was not rough, which she had by now stopped being surprised by. He was, in fact, very careful. His hands were warm and steady. "Not deep," he said. "I know," she said. He looked at the side door with the table pushed against it and the scorched frame around the gap. "What happened here?" he said. "I made a barrier." He looked at the frame again. The wood was blackened in an arc across the bottom half of the door. Whatever had been outside that door when it went had retreated very quickly. "You made that in 4 minutes," he said. 3, she said. The first minute I was listening, Boone came through the front door, bleeding from his shoulder now, a graze. She could see the type from across the room. and possibly a cracked rib from the way he was holding his left side. He looked at the doorframe. He looked at Harper. "Was that you?" he said. "Yes." He looked at Wyatt. Wyatt looked at him. "Told you," Boone said. Wyatt looked briefly, genuinely exasperated. You told me nothing of the sort," he said. "I said she was running this from the beginning," Boone said. He sat down heavily in the nearest chair. He was grinning, which was slightly alarming, given that he was bleeding. "I said that in Chapter 2. You said she might be trouble," Wyatt said. "Same thing." Callum came down the ladder from the roof hatch. His hair was full of snow, and his coat was dark at the right sleeve, which made Harper stand up straight and cross to him immediately. "Did you take another hit?" she said. "Crease," he said. "Just a crease. Let me see it." He let her see it. It was, in fact, just a crease. The bullet had grazed the outer edge of his forearm without penetrating. She cleaned it and wrapped it, and he held still throughout with the familiar patience of a man who'd decided to trust her expertise and was committed to that decision. "The stitches held," she said. She checked his shoulder while she had him close. The original wound had stayed intact through whatever he'd been doing on that roof. "Callum, this held." "Yes," he said. "I told you 10 days. You did. How does it feel?" He moved the shoulder carefully, rotating it a small degree. He pressed his lips together. "Better than I expected," he said. "Good," she said. She tied off the bandage on his arm. Her hands were very close to his, and she was aware of him being aware of that. She stepped back. The 4 of them were standing in the wrecked cabin, 2 windows blown out, a side door scorched and barricaded, blood on the floor from various sources, none of it fatal, all of it too close. The fire had gone out at some point during the fighting, and the room was getting cold. Harper looked around at all of it. Then she went and rebuilt the fire. She did it efficiently, the way she did most things. Kindling first, then the larger wood, the flint and steel from the shelf above the hearth. The fire caught and grew, and the orange light pushed the dark back to the edges of the room where it belonged. She turned around. 3 men watching her, all of them damaged, all of them standing, all of them alive because of each other. There was something in the room that wasn't there before tonight. Something she didn't quite have a word for yet. Some particular clarity. When you've been through a night like this with people, when you've each held a piece of the line and the line held, when you come out the other side and you're all still breathing, the world gets very quiet and very clear, and the important things become very obvious. She looked at Wyatt. She looked at Boone. She looked at Callum. "This cabin is finished," she said. "They know it too well now. We need to move tomorrow." Wyatt nodded. "I have a thought about where. We can talk about it in the morning," she said, "after everyone has slept. I'll take first watch." Callum said. "No," Harper said. "You took the roof for 2 hours in February. Sit down. Wyatt takes first watch." Wyatt took first watch. Boone was asleep in his chair in about 4 minutes. She checked his side for the ribs, 2 fingers, walking the line of them while he winced, and decided nothing was cracked, just bruised deeply, which was its own problem, but a survivable one. She sat down by the fire. Callum sat down across from her. He'd retrieved his book from under the table, where it had slid during the chaos, and he held it. But he wasn't reading. He was looking at the fire. After a while, he said, "You were never in the back room." She looked at him. "The plan," he said. "Wyatt put you at the rear wall. Men like Sterling. They assume when you put a woman at the back wall, you're hiding her." He looked at her steadily. "You turned the back wall into a kill position and made an improvised chemical barrier and held the rear door alone." "Yes," she said. "You planned that," he said. "When you reorganized the medical bag, I planned for the possibility," she said. "There's a difference." He looked at the fire again. "No," he said quietly, "there isn't. Planning for the possibility is the plan." He turned his gaze back to her. "You protected us." She held his gaze. "Yes," she said, "I did. And you protected me. And that's how it's supposed to work." He was very still. "Not one direction," he said. "Not a question. Never one direction," she said. "Safety isn't something one person gives another. It's something people build together. The moment it goes one direction, it stops being protection and starts being control. Sterling believed he was keeping me safe." She looked at the fire. He was just keeping me. Callum absorbed that slowly, the way he absorbed everything. My mother's people understood that, he said after a while. The women in her village weren't kept. They were essential. Builders, healers, decision-makers. The community didn't work without them at the center. He looked at his book, which is why it was so important. To the men who wanted control of that territory. To destroy that understanding first. Before the land, before anything. He said it without anger, with the particular, exhausted clarity of someone who'd thought about something so long they'd come out the other side of the emotion into something that was just true. They knew that a people who understood the full worth of their women were a people you could not simply crush. The fire crackled. Callum, she said. He looked at her. That knowledge, she said, it belongs to you. They didn't take it. His face did something she hadn't seen it do before. Very small, very brief. He opened his book. She sat with the fire. Outside walked the perimeter in the dark cold, one slow circle at a time, keeping watch over the cabin and the people in it. Above the stars were extraordinary, the kind of density you only saw on the clearest, coldest nights. More light than dark, if you knew how to look at it. Harper looked at the stars through the blown-out window. Tomorrow they would move. Tomorrow the next problem would arrive and require its own solution. Sterling was out there somewhere, and he was not the kind of man who stopped. But tonight the fire was warm, and the people she was with were alive, and the stars over Wyoming were extraordinary. She let herself have that. For tonight, she let herself have all of it. The cabin smelled like gunsmoke and scorched wood, and 3 days of fear finally breaking open. They'd moved what they could from the wreckage. Boone had gotten the side door back on its hinge through sheer determination and inappropriate language. 2 windows were still without shutters, and the February cold was coming through them. But the fire was going, and the lamps were lit, and after everything the night had delivered, the warmth in the room felt earned in a way that warmth rarely did. Harper stood in the middle of it. She was looking at the 3 of them, Wyatt at the table, hands flat on the wood, watching her. Boone with his back to the re-hung door, arms crossed, watching her. Callum in his chair against the wall, book forgotten, watching her. She'd been thinking about this for a while, about what she wanted, about what it meant to want something freely, without negotiation, without calculating what it would cost her. She'd spent 6 years calculating. With Sterling, every small desire came with a price she discovered later. Every moment of warmth had a debt attached to it that she wouldn't know about until it was called in. That was how he worked. That was how men like him always worked. They made you feel chosen until you realized you'd been purchased. She was done calculating. She crossed to Wyatt first. He watched her come, his pale eyes steady, and he didn't move. She reached down and picked up his revolver from where it rested on the table beside his hand. She held his gaze while she did it. He let her take it. She set it on the shelf above the fireplace. She turned to Boone. He was very still, which was unusual for him. His entire body arrested in the particular stillness of a man containing something enormous. She crouched and picked up the hunting knife from beside his boot. He watched her do it. She set the knife on the shelf beside the revolver. She walked to Callum. He was already watching her approach, dark eyes completely open, none of the usual guarding. She reached across him and unclipped the bandolier from his shoulder, the one he'd put back on after the siege out of habit and necessity, and probably some instinct older than either. The rounds were heavy. She draped it over the arm of his chair within reach. She didn't put it on the shelf. That one was his to keep close. She just moved it out of the way. She stepped back so she could see all 3 of them. "I want you to know," she said, "that I understand exactly what I'm choosing. I'm not afraid. I'm not confused. And I'm not doing this because I owe any of you anything." She looked at them steadily. "I'm doing this because I've spent 6 years belonging to someone who never asked. And I want to know, at least once in my life, what it feels like to choose." The fire cracked behind her. She reached up with both hands and began to unbutton her dress. Her fingers were steady. She didn't hurry. Button by button, from the collar down, deliberate and unhurried. And the room watched in absolute silence an absolute stillness. The lamplight was warm and orange, and the wrecked cabin, with its scorched doorframe and absent shutters, was in that moment the most honest room she'd ever stood in. The dress slipped from her shoulders. She was alive, scarred from the creek bed gash on her arm, bruised along her ribs from the run through the timber, bearing all the evidence of the past weeks on her skin. She had never felt more precisely, entirely herself. Wyatt made a sound low in his chest. Boone's arms came uncrossed. Callum closed his eyes for exactly 1 second and then opened them. "Harper," Wyatt said. His voice was very rough. All three of them, together in a single low exhale of sound. "Hell," Boone said. "You'll make us lose our minds." She held her ground. "Then lose them," she said. What happened next was not what Sterling had ever made her feel. Not once in 6 years. Sterling had treated her body like something he was cataloging, something that belonged in his inventory. He touched her the way he handled everything he owned, with possession, with the assumption of access. These men moved toward her like she was something they'd been given the privilege of being near. Wyatt was first, and he was exactly as she'd read him, anchoring, both hands at her face, not grabbing, just holding, the warmth of them enormous against her cold skin. And he looked at her for one long moment before he did anything else at all. Just looked, like he was making absolutely sure she was still choosing. And she held his gaze, and he kissed her like a man who understood that a woman's body is a gift given, not a thing to be taken. And every second of it was hers to stop if she wanted. She did not want to stop. Boone was different entirely, where Wyatt was deep and careful. Boone was all that restless energy, finally given somewhere to go. Fervent and enormous and surprisingly reverent. He was a man who'd carried guilt about women for 9 years and knew it. And every touch was something adjacent to an apology and a promise at the same time. He said her name twice. Just her name. And the way he said it was its own entire sentence. Callum. Callum was the one who surprised her most. He was precise the way he was precise at everything. Sharp and unhurried and completely attentive, reading her reactions the way he read tree lines and ridge lines, missing nothing, adjusting everything. He said very little, which was also what she'd expected. But what he did say came so close to her ear and so quietly and with such absolute sincerity that she kept it. She kept all of it. The room was warm. The fire was high. Outside, the wind pressed at the broken windows, and the Wyoming night did what it always did, which was be enormous and cold and indifferent to the small human dramas happening inside whatever 4 walls were available. But inside those walls, she was held by people who had bled for her and fought beside her and had sat on their own desire for weeks out of respect for her right to choose the timing, who had never once made her feel like a destination to be arrived at, who had learned her before they touched her. She'd never had that. She was the one in the center of all of it. She set the pace. She said yes, and she said wait, and she said yes again. And every instruction was followed without complaint or negotiation. And at some point, she stopped thinking in any language at all, and was just present, entirely present, which was also something she'd never had. When it was over, the fire had burned down to a steady low burn, and all 4 of them were warm and quiet and close. Wyatt's arm was under her shoulders. Boone was at her back, one enormous hand resting flat against her ribs, his breathing already slowing toward sleep. Callum sat against the wall nearby, close enough to reach if she reached for him, not assuming she would. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about Sterling, about the dinner, where he'd told her that a woman's purpose was to make a man feel at home in the world. She'd nodded. She'd cut her food into smaller pieces and nodded and said nothing. She thought about all the nodding she'd done for 6 years, all the words she'd left unsaid, all the choices she'd deferred until she'd almost forgotten she was allowed to make them. "Harper," Wyatt said quietly. She turned her head toward him. "You're thinking very loudly," he said. "Sorry," she said. "Don't be." He looked at the ceiling alongside her. "What are you thinking about?" She was quiet for a moment. "I'm thinking that I spent a long time believing that belonging to someone was a kind of safety," she said. "Sterling made himself seem essential, like if I didn't have him, I wouldn't have anything. and it took me 6 years to understand that what I actually didn't have was myself. Wyatt was quiet. You have yourself now, he said. Yes, she said. I do. Boone stirred at her back. You had yourself the whole time, he said, muffled. You just needed to remember. That's a simpler version of the story, she said. I'm a simple person, he said. He was clearly on the edge of sleep. It works for me. Callum reached over and extinguished the nearest lamp. The cabin went softer, just the firelight now. Rest, he said, to her specifically. She thought. She rested. She slept without calculating anything at all. The telegram came on the first morning of March. Wyatt's contact at the relay station rode out to find them at the new position, a farmhouse 3 miles east of the original cabin, owned by a widow named Mrs. Falk, who asked no questions and accepted fair rent and baked extraordinary cornbread. The telegram was 2 lines. Wyatt read it and passed it to Harper without expression. Marsh received the package, verifying. Sterling knows it's gone. He is running. Harper read it twice. Running where? Boone said. East, Callum said. From the window. He'd been looking at something on the horizon for the past 10 minutes. He's running east. He turned. The noon train out of Ridgeback Junction. Sterling has a private car on it. I've been watching his men move toward the railhead all morning. Harper looked at the telegram. Then she set it down. If he gets on that train and clears the territory, she said. He goes back to the East Coast, where he has lawyers and judges and politicians in his pocket. The ledger goes to print, yes, but he disappears into money and influence and legal maneuvering, and we spend the next 5 years watching him avoid consequences. Nobody disagreed. Or, she said. She looked at all 3 of them. Or we make sure he doesn't get to the East Coast. Wyatt was already at the map on the table. The line runs southeast out of the junction, he said. He put his finger on the map. Echo Canyon, 12 miles out. The train has to slow there for the grade. He looked at Callum. There's a ridge running parallel to the track about a 1/4 mile east. I know the ridge, Callum said. Of course you do, Boone said. They were on horseback in 20 minutes. The ride to the junction took 40 minutes at push, cutting cross-country through frozen scrub and shallow creek crossings, and once through a stand of birch so dense they had to go single file. Harper rode in the middle, between Boone ahead and Callum behind, with Wyatt leading at a pace that was exactly as fast as the terrain would allow, and not 1 second faster. She had the colt at her hip. She'd been carrying it for 2 weeks, and it had become ordinary in the way that all necessary things eventually became ordinary. It was a tool. It was hers. They reached the ridge above Echo Canyon with 17 minutes to spare. The canyon was magnificent in the way that only Wyoming was magnificent, which was to say, completely without concern for whether anyone found it beautiful. The walls dropped 60 feet on either side of the rail bed, and the track curved through them on a grade that forced the train to shed speed coming in. At the curve, the locomotive would be moving at perhaps a 1/4 of its open country pace. Callum went to the ridge with his rifle, without being asked. Wyatt looked at Boone. Coal car first, Wyatt said. His hired men will be there. We deal with them. We get to the VIP car. And Sterling, Boone said. Sterling is mine, Wyatt said. He said it flat and without drama. Boone did not argue. They heard the train before they saw it. The low mechanical sound of something enormous working against gravity. The push and exhale of the engine. The click of the wheels on the rail joints. Then it came around the upper bend. The locomotive black and steaming. The cars behind it, rolling slow. Harper looked at the train. Somewhere in one of those cars was the man who had given her a mink coat and called it love, who had hit her once across the face with an open hand and then spent 3 weeks being extraordinarily kind about it, who had told her, calmly, the night she'd found the ledger, that there were very few women in the world capable of understanding the sort of work he did, and that she was luckier than most to simply not have to think about it. She thought about it every day. She thought about it right now. Go, Wyatt said. Boone went. He hit the coal car from the side, dropping from a ledge above the track as the train rolled under it. Landing on the iron running board with both feet and the impact of 230 pounds of horse wrangler. The two men in the coal car turned around and found him already in motion, and the next 30 seconds were primarily loud and one-sided in Boone's favor. Wyatt and Harper boarded from the coupling between the second and third cars. She went up the ladder on the right, and he went up the left, and they went over the roof at a crouch, the wind from the train's speed cutting hard even at low grade, the canyon walls rushing past on both sides, close enough to touch. She could see Callum's position on the ridge as they cleared the top of the car. A small, dark shape, very still, positioned above and ahead of the train, covering the approach. She saw him shift slightly as she came into view, orienting, adjusting. She kept moving. The roof of the second car, the gap, the jump, the landing. She'd done more physically difficult things in the past 3 weeks. She cleared it cleanly. The VIP car was at the rear of the train, separated from the others by a locked platform coupling. Wyatt came up beside her and looked at the lock. He shot it off. The platform door swung open, and he went through first, and she went in right behind him. The car was everything Sterling's money was. Dark wood paneling, leather furniture bolted to the floor, a writing desk along one wall, oil lamps in brass fixtures, thick carpet in a deep burgundy. It looked like a room that had been moved somewhere. It didn't belong. Sterling Voss stood at the far end of the car. He was exactly as she remembered. Tall, carefully dressed, his dark hair combed flat, the face she'd eaten breakfast across for 2 years. He had a gun in his hand, a small one, the kind a man carried when he didn't like to think of himself as the sort of man who carried guns. He looked at Harper. "I always knew you were smarter than I gave you credit for," he said. He said it pleasantly, the way he said everything. "I just misjudged the direction." "Put the gun down." "Sterling," she said. He tilted his head slightly. He was looking at her and at Wyatt, and he was doing the same calculation he always did, assessing what each person in the room wanted and what leverage he had over it. "The ledger's gone," he said. "I know it is, whatever damage it does. My lawyers will contain most of it. The names in it that matter have already been warned." He shifted his gaze to Wyatt. "You were Greville's sheriff. I know who you are. I know what Aldous Cray's men did to you." He said it without apology. "That was business. Nothing in this territory is personal. Everything you did to her was personal," Wyatt said. Sterling looked at Harper again. He used the tone, the patient, reasonable one, the one he used to explain things she was too simple to understand. "You took something that belonged to me. That ledger documented private business arrangements. You committed theft and you colluded with criminals. Any court in this country, any court you haven't bought," Harper said. He smiled. "They're rarer than you'd think." She held his gaze. "You told me once," she said, "that a woman's purpose was to make a man feel at home in the world. I've been thinking about that." She stood very still. "I thought about it tonight, actually. And what I think is that you spent your life making the world small enough that you could own all of it. The land, the roots, the officials, the women. Because owning things was the only way you knew how to feel safe." She looked at him, and I think that is the most frightened thing I've ever heard. Sterling's pleasant expression went flat. He raised the gun. Wyatt moved. He was across the car in 3 strides. Fast in the way that men who'd spent years in violent situations were fast. Not dramatically, but efficiently. And he hit Sterling's gun arm at the wrist before the shot was fully formed, and the small pistol went sideways and discharged into the ceiling. And then Wyatt had Sterling's arm bent behind him, and Sterling was against the window, with his face pressed to the dark glass. Outside, a shot from the ridge. Callum had taken a guard off the rear platform who'd apparently decided to come through the door. 1 shot, then nothing. Sterling was breathing hard. Wyatt held him there for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, close to Sterling's ear, "What Cray's men did to me was business, you said. 20 men on their knees in Greville owed money they'd never see the end of. Families with no options. Women with no options." He applied a small additional pressure. "I thought the same thing you did, that if I just worked within the structure, used the law would work. And then the law showed me what it was actually for. So I stopped pretending. He stepped back and let Sterling turn around. The ledger is printing, everything in it. And you're going to stand in front of whatever thin slice of honest judiciary still exists in this territory, and you're going to do it without your money in your pocket. Because by the time those papers hit New York, your accounts will be frozen. Sterling looked at him. Then at Harper. You think that changes things, he said. Men like me. The train lurched as it hit the bottom of the grade, and the engine opened up. Sterling stumbled sideways and reached for the window frame, and his hand hit the release lever for the emergency exit, and the door blew open in the slipstream, and the night outside roared in enormous and cold. Sterling went through it. It happened fast, too fast for anything to be done. One moment he was reaching for balance, and then he was simply gone, out and down. The darkness of the gorge below receiving him the way that darkness always receives the things that fall into it. Silence. Wyatt stood at the open door and looked out. Harper stood beside him. Below was the canyon floor and the black water of the creek running through it, and the steep walls on both sides, rising up to the strip of clear March sky above. And none of it looked any different than it had before. She waited to feel something clear-cut, horror or triumph, or some particular settled emotion. What she felt was tired. And then Boone's voice came from the coupling door behind them, large and alive and slightly out of breath. Tell me I didn't miss it. Harper turned around. You missed it, Wyatt said. Boone looked at the open door, looked at Harper, looked at Wyatt. He said. Then he sat down on Sterling's leather sofa and stretched his long legs out. Nice car, he said. Spring came slowly to Wyoming territory, the way spring always came there. Not all at once, not in any celebration. It arrived in pieces. A week in March, where the temperature crept above freezing for 4 consecutive days. A thaw that turned the ground to mud, and the mud to something almost like possibility. Then a cold snap that made everyone feel foolish for hoping. Then in April, the first actual green, thin and tentative, pushing through the dark ground at the edges of the creek beds and along the south-facing slopes, where the sun reached first. By May, it was undeniable. The town of Wheeler's Crossing had grown considerably since autumn. A mill had come in, a new hotel, a proper school building with 2 windows and a real wooden floor. The railroad was pushing a spur line through from the north, not Sterling's railroad. That entity was in receivership, and its assets were being untangled by federal investigators and a succession of court proceedings that would take years to fully resolve. A different line, a smaller operation run by people who'd watched Sterling's fall with a great deal of nervous self-reflection and had decided that legitimate business was ultimately safer than the alternative. The building on Creek Street had been a tannery the previous year. Harper had it cleaned and rebuilt through April and into May, and on the 1st of June she opened the door. She'd painted the sign herself. The letters were not particularly elegant, but they were clear. Callaway Clinic and Women's Refuge. All people seen, none turned away. She'd used some of the confiscated funds, Sterling's assets, portion that hadn't been frozen and was available for claim by his victims. Had gone through a legal process that Harper had participated in with 2 lawyers and a federal representative and considerable patience. And what came out the other side wasn't everything, but it was enough. Enough for the building, enough for supplies, enough for 6 months of operation while she established the clinic's footing. The rest she'd handed directly to 3 women named in Sterling's ledger, whom Daniel Marsh had tracked down while reporting his story. Marsh had done the work properly. He'd taken the ledger and spent 8 weeks verifying every name, every route, every transaction. And then he'd published a 4-part series in the St. Louis Dispatch that was reprinted in 7 other major papers before the month was out. Sterling's legacy, which he'd spent 30 years constructing, took approximately 3 weeks to fully collapse in print. Harper read the final article on the porch of the farmhouse where they'd been staying through the winter. Wyatt brought her coffee. She read it twice and then folded the newspaper and set it on her knee and looked at the mountains. "How does it feel?" Wyatt said. "Like it should have happened sooner," she said, "for the women in those pages." She looked at the folded paper, but also like something that happened at exactly the right time. "Because a month earlier, I couldn't have gotten it out." "No," he said. "And a month earlier, I was someone who thought asking permission to breathe was just how life worked." She picked up her coffee. "I needed the blizzard." Wyatt looked at her sideways. "You needed to throw a mink coat into a fire," he said. "That too," she said. The clinic opened on a Tuesday, and by the end of the first week, she had seen 14 patients. 6 were minors with the usual range of hand and back injuries. 3 were women from the homestead settlements who'd had no medical access within a 40-mile radius for the past 2 years, and arrived with a collection of untreated conditions that Harper addressed methodically over 3 separate appointments each. 2 were women who'd come not for medical care, but for the other half of the sign, the refuge. She gave them rooms in the back. She gave them time. She did not press them for their stories. She let them tell her what they were ready to tell her, and she believed them when they told it, which they said afterward was something they hadn't expected. One of them was named Clara. Clara was 19. She'd been on a route that appeared in Sterling's ledger under the designation of a labor contract, which was the language Sterling's organization used for something that was very far from labor in any honest definition. Harper sat with Clara on the second evening, and they drank tea, and Harper did not try to explain anything, or frame anything, or make anything sound better than it was. She just sat there, available, present. "What happens after this?" Clara asked. "Whatever you want to happen," Harper said. Clara looked at her. "I mean that entirely," Harper said. "There isn't a script. There isn't a correct next step that I'm aware of, and you're not. You're 19 years old, and you have, from what I can tell, excellent instincts and a very clear understanding of what you will not accept, which is more than most people develop in a lifetime." She looked at Clara. "So what do you want to happen?" Clara thought about it for a while. "I want to learn to do what you do," she said. "The medical part." Harper set down her teacup. "Then I'll teach you," she said. Boone fixed the clinic's front steps in June. They'd been uneven since the building went up, and he'd been eyeing them every time he walked in for 3 weeks. One morning he simply arrived with lumber and tools and fixed them, square and solid, then stood back and looked at his work with the expression he always had when he'd built or repaired something correctly. Harper came out with coffee and handed him a cup. "Thank you," she said. "Steps shouldn't be uneven," he said. He drank the coffee. "Callum put in that window brace on the north side this morning. I noticed," she said. "He didn't say anything about it." "He wouldn't," she said. Boone looked at the mountains. He'd been doing that more lately, looking at the horizon in a way that wasn't watchfulness, but was more like appreciation. Like a man relearning how to look at something without calculating the threat in it first. "Cora's coming in the fall," he said, "my sister. She wants to see what's out here. I'd like to meet her," Harper said. He looked at her. "She'll like you," he said. "She'll probably also have approximately 40 opinions about everything within the first 10 minutes. I have approximately 40 opinions about everything within the first 10 minutes, Harper said. Boone grinned. The real one this time. The one that was completely unguarded and made him look considerably younger. "Yeah," he said. "That's why she'll like you." On a morning in late June, very early, before the rest of the town had properly started, Harper woke to light coming through the bedroom window at an angle that was warm and golden and absolutely nothing like winter. She lay still for a moment. Wyatt's arm was around her, loose and warm, his breathing slow and even. On her other side, Boone was flat on his back with one arm over his eyes, which was apparently just how he slept. Through the open window, she could hear Callum on the small porch, the very quiet sounds of a man having coffee in the early morning by himself, watching the world come awake. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about the blizzard, the 3 clicks of 3 hammers in the dark, the firelight coming up over Wyatt's jaw and Boone's eyes, and Callum on the ladder. the mink coat going up in the grate, herself collapsing on a stranger's floor with a ledger pressed against her chest and three men standing over her, trying to decide what to do with her. She thought about what they had built since then. Not a simple thing. Nothing about it was simple. Four people with significant damage and significant capability and significant desire, and the shared understanding that none of them owned any of the others, not one piece, and that the whole arrangement worked precisely because of that. Safety built together. She'd said that to Callum in the wrecked cabin. She'd said it, and she'd meant it, and they had been proving it true every day since. She got up carefully. She pulled on her robe and went out to the porch. Callum handed her a cup of coffee without turning around, which meant he'd heard her coming before she got through the door. She took it and stood beside him. The town was quiet. Creek Street was empty. The clinic sign was visible from here, white paint catching the early light. In the east, the sky was going from gray to a particular layered gold, and the mountains above the tree line were lit from below in a way that made them look less like obstacles and more like evidence of something. Callum, she said. He looked at her. She'd been thinking about how to say this. She wasn't sure there was a perfect way, so she said it plainly. A year ago, I was in Denver, cutting someone's meat into smaller pieces at a dinner party, and nodding and telling myself it was manageable. She looked at the clinic sign. I want you to know that I understand how far that is from here, and I understand what you three did to help me get from there to here. And I don't take that as something that just happened. Callum held his cup in both hands. You got yourself here, he said. We were available. There's a difference between available and present. She said you were present. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. We were. She looked at the mountains. What I've been trying to understand, she said slowly, is that love that's real doesn't look like the thing Sterling offered. It doesn't look like protection given in exchange for obedience. It doesn't look like safety traded for freedom. She looked at Callum. Real love looks like what we've been doing. Four damaged people deciding that each other's autonomy is not negotiable, that each other's healing is worth patience, that each other's scars are part of the whole picture and not something to be fixed or hidden. Callum was looking at her. My mother's people had a concept, he said. Loosely translated, it means the people you walk beside, not behind or in front of, the ones moving in the same direction, at the same pace, each carrying their own weight. Yes, Harper said, that behind them, through the door. She could hear Wyatt moving in the kitchen, the sound of the stove, the clatter of a pot, Boone's voice, half asleep, asking about biscuits. She turned and looked back through the doorway at the warm interior of the house where she lived, at Wyatt methodically making breakfast, at Boone propped on one elbow on the bed, his dark hair loose and his eyes barely open, at the clinic sign through the near window, and past it the street coming slowly to life, and past that the open Wyoming sky going gold above everything. Wyatt looked up from the stove and saw her in the doorway and held her gaze for a second. His pale eyes were warm in a way she had not seen in them the night she arrived. The scar on his jaw caught the morning light. He looked like a man who was, carefully and with great effort, learning to inhabit a life again. Breakfast, he said. She came inside. The four of them ate together. The biscuits were Wyatt's, which meant they were competent rather than excellent. And Boone ate four of them anyway, while conducting a running commentary about the previous batch that Wyatt absorbed with the weary patience of a man who knew the criticism was fair. Callum ate in his usual silence, but his chair was several inches from the wall, a habit that had been shifting slowly for months, 1 inch at a time, so gradual that nobody had mentioned it, but everyone had noticed. Harper looked at all of them. She thought about the last words she'd said to Daniel Marsh's journalist contact when the woman had interviewed her in April, asking for her account of the events. The woman had asked her at the end of the interview, almost as an afterthought, what she wanted people to understand from the story. Harper had sat with that question for a moment. Then she'd said, love and human rights aren't about ownership or chains. They are about standing free under the same open sky, honoring each other's scars. and having the absolute right to choose exactly who you belong to. The journalist had written it down. It had appeared in the final article in the series. Below her name, it was now apparently being quoted in other places, in other papers, in letters that arrived at the clinic, written by women in other territories who'd read the coverage and wanted to say that it had meant something to them. She hoped it meant something. She hoped it kept meaning something long after the story stopped being news and became just one more true thing about the world. She passed the coffee to Boone, who took it without asking, which was its own kind of trust. She listened to Wyatt and Callum having what passed for their version of a conversation, which involved long silences and occasional single-sentence contributions that somehow added up to actual communication. She watched Boone drain the coffee cup and immediately look around for more. Outside, Wheeler's Crossing was waking up. Voices on the street, a horse going past at a walk, the mill starting up, a sound that had become background. Familiar, the sound of a town deciding to exist. The clinic would open in 2 hours. Clara would come in at 8 to start her first lesson in wound care. There was work to do. There was always work to do. That was not a burden. That was just the cost of being alive in a world that needed the work. Harper Calloway finished her coffee and went to get ready. The day was already warm. As the morning sun rose over Wheeler's Crossing, Harper Calloway stood before the clinic she had built from the ruins of the life she had escaped. Only months earlier, she had been stumbling through a Wyoming blizzard with frozen hands, an incriminating ledger pressed against her body, and the certainty that Sterling Voss would destroy her if he ever found her. She had arrived at a lonely cabin, believing she was only searching for shelter. Instead, she found something she had never truly known before. People who would stand beside her without asking her to surrender herself in return. Harper's journey teaches us that freedom does not always begin with a great victory. Sometimes, it begins with one small act of refusal. For Harper, it began when she threw Sterling's expensive mink coat into the fire. That coat represented wealth, status, and the comfortable prison Sterling had built around her. Burning it did not immediately make her safe, but it marked the moment she decided that no luxury was worth the price of her dignity. The flames did more than warm the cabin. They burned away the lie that being provided for was the same as being loved. There is an important difference between protection and control. Sterling claimed that he wanted to protect Harper, but his protection demanded obedience. He wanted her quiet, dependent, and grateful. He gave her expensive things so she would forget that he had taken away her choices. Wyatt, Boone, and Callum showed her another kind of protection. They did not lock her in a safe room while they made every decision. They gave her a place at the table. They taught her how to defend herself, listened to her plans, respected her medical knowledge, and trusted her judgment. True love does not say, "I will make every choice for you because I know what is best." True love says, "I will walk beside you while you make your own choices." It does not demand weakness in exchange for safety. It does not turn another person into property. Real love honors boundaries, respects freedom, and understands that consent is not a single question asked once. It is a continuing act of listening, patience, and respect. Harper also reminds us that courage is not the absence of fear. She was afraid when she stole the ledger. She was afraid when Sterling's hired men surrounded the cabin. She was afraid when she climbed onto that moving train to confront the man who had controlled her for years. But she acted anyway. As she told Callum, being afraid and being capable are not mutually exclusive. That lesson belongs to every person who has ever doubted their strength because their hands were shaking. Fear does not make us weak. Fear tells us that something matters. Courage is the decision that our fear will not be allowed to choose our future. The story also shows us that healing is rarely a solitary journey. Harper saved herself when she chose to run, but she did not heal alone. Wyatt, Boone, and Callum each carried wounds of their own. Wyatt had been betrayed by a corrupt legal system. Boone carried years of guilt over what had happened to his sister. Callum had spent his life watching every doorway because safety had never been predictable for him. None of them were untouched by the past. Harper did not magically erase their scars, and they did not erase hers. Instead, they created a place where those scars could be acknowledged without shame. They listened when the others were ready to speak. They remained silent when silence was kinder. They learned that helping someone does not mean controlling their recovery. Sometimes, the greatest gift we can offer is simply to remain present. Most importantly, Harper did not stop after Sterling's empire collapsed. Revenge was never the final purpose of her journey. She transformed justice into service. She used what remained of Sterling's fortune to open a clinic and a refuge where no one would be turned away. She took the pain that had nearly destroyed her and turned it into protection for others. All elements within this narrative are fictional and crafted for storytelling purposes. The author bears no intention of referencing real people, cultures, or events in a literal sense. Readers are encouraged to engage with the work as a piece of creative expression rather than documented reality.